Welcome to Life Seminars with Dr. Norm Wise from Living Water Counseling at First Church West in Plantation, Florida. This Life Seminar segment focuses on healthy boundaries. Here's Dr. Norm Wise.
What happens is things trigger for us. Our subconscious brain remembers every single time we were wounded, and then something happens in the present time, and bang, it sets off all the emotions. And so our computer runs through all of the memories and it delivers all the emotions of the last 30 years that we believe relate to this situation into that moment. And everybody else thinks we're really overreacting. And the fact is we really are overreacting, but we can't see it as an overreaction because we are carrying with us so many wounds inside. And that's why it's important. Your past is not past until it no longer influences you today. Your past is not past until it no longer influences you today. As long as those past wounds are coloring your thinking, your emotions, your attitudes, your decisions, you still have some work to do. And yes, we can learn from the past, but we have to come to some peace with the past. And again, I would say one of the promises of the Messiah Jesus is that he'll bind up our hearts. And so there's also a spiritual dimension to that from my perspective. In addition to that, and this one's really hard, we don't like to deal with that, all human beings are wicked. And it's real simple. Doing that which is not loving, and doing that which is not God's will, doing that which is not wise, and doing that which is not in harmony, promises to give us more profit, more pleasure, and more power. In other words, if we cheat, we win. And if we choose instead the road of love, compassion, caring, what I would understand to be God's will, we really predict, if I do that, I'm going to get creamed. That doesn't work in the real world. And so I'm not going to choose what I believe is the right path. I'm going to choose what I believe is the efficient path. See, most people don't do immoral things to do immoral things. They do immoral things to solve problems. There's a few people that do immoral things just to do immoral things. That's a whole other issue. But they're in a minority. Most of us who are sane, relatively, we do it on a calculation of a win-loss calculation. And every single one of us have at times chosen wickedness over righteousness. And that's just true of everybody, including me. Also, wickedness is really hard because sometimes our evaluation of good and bad is all messed up. Our conscience is messed up. Someone said, to say no and not feel guilty. Sometimes we feel guilty over doing right. In other words, our internal moral compass is messed up, and so when we do something right, we feel bad about it. And sometimes we feel good about doing wrong, and we really convince ourselves that acting in a wrong way is right. In other words, we call good evil and evil good. We haven't made the right moral distinction. That's true of all human beings. We mess up sometimes. And usually as we get older, sometimes we'll look back on past life and you go, you ever have that moment of, oh boy, if I'd only known this 10 years ago. You ever had that moment? So you have those moments, see, so we start growing, maturing, and hopefully becoming a little wiser, and we reflect on our life. And unless we're totally lost and the ways of a person are always right in their own eyes, which is generally true. But at our more humble moments, we can kind of admit, at least to ourselves, I didn't handle that right. May not tell anybody else on the planet. In fact, we might defend our actions to the death. But within our own heart, we know that we don't really think we handled it right. We also sometimes are wild. And we can be wild for good. You know, there can be somebody, they go, you know, they are in a place and they're interacting with people and they run into this guy who's homeless and he hasn't had anything to eat for a week, and their heart goes out to him, and they look in their wallet and all the money they've got in the world, they just got paid and they're not getting paid that much, and all the money they got in the world is $60, and they give the person the $60 because they want that person to know that there's somebody that cares about them and loves them, and, you know, that God loves them and everything. Yeah, the thing is they suddenly, and now, you know, the morning after, that person might wake up and say, wow, I don't have any money. I gave it away last night. But at that wild moment, okay, we're moved by strong passion of caring, and we did something wild.
I've done it.
Yeah, everybody's done
And
it.
then you think it's right, and then you think that
Well,
you know, the goodness of what
well,
is
yeah, a whole other question whether it's right or wrong, but it's part of who we are. People do wild things. Sometimes wild for good, but sometimes we do wild things for bad. That's what I call the morning after syndrome. You find yourself in some kind of crazy situation, say New Year's or whatever, and all kinds of things are going crazy and everybody's having a good time. You get yourself all excited, yada, 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 and then, you know, and then you wake up the next morning and you go, what was I thinking? Well, you weren't doing a lot of thinking. You were doing a whole lot of feeling, and you did something pretty wildly evil, passionately. And that's really, most of the domestic violence calls happen from 11 p.m. to 2 in the morning. And there are people that do things during those hours that are wild. And they wouldn't do them in their right mind, but they do them. And that can have horrible consequences. In addition to that, we're also wonderful. Again, in this, I think we're wonderful because God is involved in our life. We're wonderful, not only we're just wonderfully loved by God. We're wonderfully cared about by God. He, in fact, I believe, loved us so much, he sent a Messiah to care for us, die for us, forgive us our sins. So we have, you know, we're significant in ways beyond, every human being is significant. Now, the reason why that's important in boundaries is, first of all, we're going to have to get realistic expectations about people. Because every single person you interact with has all those qualities, including you. And because of that, your relationships are going to be messy. Sorry, they are. Because human beings are complex. And they're carrying a lot of baggage. They're carrying a lot of stuff. You're carrying a lot of stuff. Your stuff is going to interact. And so that's one of the reasons why we need a plan. Because if we don't have a plan, we usually don't do well. Spontaneity, from my point of view, is overrated. You know, spontaneity can lead to wonderful moments, but most of the time, spontaneity gets us in trouble. And we usually regret what we spontaneously did. Okay? And so learning self-control and how to gain self-control is worthwhile. Now, you can even give your permission to say, I'm going to be spontaneous tonight. At least you're saying this is going to be a spontaneous night. I'm putting in my spontaneous mode, okay? But you may want to put some boundaries on that. By the way, that's also important. You have to set self-boundaries. You have to decide, what will I do and what won't I do? That's a basic boundary. So you have to set a boundary on yourself. What are the things that I'm willing to do and that I would voluntarily do, that I don't see any problem doing, and what are the things I don't want to do? That's a good thing to begin asking ourselves. Because if you're not clear where your boundaries are, then what Paul said, you know, people can run over them and you don't even know yet because, oh, wait a minute, I didn't really want that to happen. I didn't really want, if you're not self-defined, there'll be somebody more than happy to define you for you. I mean, that's not good. You want to be self-defined, not have somebody else define you. Yes?
Can that be sort of like, I had 2 long 5-hour discussions with my ex-sister-in-law
Okay, 2 long 5-hour discussions with your
About-
ex-sister-in-law.
about me,
About you?
and my birth and all this
Oh.
stuff, and what I've been through, and she was saying, Kathy, you need to know your limitations.
Ah,
Is that kind of
yes.
like a boundary?
That's a boundary, yes.
Okay.
I have some bad news for everybody here. Do not be offended. This is bad news.
Yeah.
You are not God, okay? So I know some of you are going to struggle with that, but you are not God, okay? You have, again, remember, you're weak and wounded. Yeah, that's limitations. You don't have the answers to everybody's problems. You're not even responsible to try to solve every problem everybody has. Wow. We have to figure out, in fact, because I'm limited, see, I only have 168 hours a week. I'm only really awake about 100 hours a week. And I don't get any way to save any of those hours. And on my very last week of life, I'm going to be shortchanged. I won't get my 168. And the thing is, that instantly puts a limitation on you, which we're going to talk about later, but that means you can't give away more than 100 hours. And that means, trust me, reality can come to you and start wanting more than what you can do in 100 hours. That's a limitation, that's a boundary. And you're going to be held responsible for how you use your 100 hours. You will want to use those 100 hours of life as wisely as you can. Now, that requires a whole lot, but that does mean you're going to have to say no to some people. Because it doesn't take too long before people have asked you so much that you're out of time. And then, by the way, that's when we start doing passive aggressive. We say yes, but we simply overcommit. It's like being in debt. You commit yourself to more than your income can afford, and so now you're in trouble. The same thing is true of time, even more so, because you can't save up time. And once you commit yourself to more than what can be done in 100 hours, you're in trouble. Because people are going to get angry with you. They're going to say you don't keep your word, that you're not, And so it'd been better to say no to somebody right up front. Say, listen, what you're asking me to do, I know it's very important to you. I know you really want me to do it, but I can't. I'm already spent. I don't have any time to put into it, so I'm sorry. You'll have to find someone else. Other key, you are not the only person in the world that can help someone. See, you're not God again. You are not the only possible person, so you have to decide. See, we have all these decisions we have to make. We have to make a decision on how we're going to do that. Okay, we'll read the boundary. We'll read the definition of boundaries there out loud. It starts with personal boundaries right underneath the Matthew 26:41. This is the way we've defined our term here, so we'll go ahead and read it. Personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits. Are you guys reading that out loud? Okay, I can't hear you too much. A little bit increase on the volume. We'll start it again. Personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify for him or her what are biblical, reasonable, safe, and allowable ways for other people to behave around him or her, and how he or she will respond when someone steps outside those limits. It is learning to say yes and no at the proper time and place in relationships. So very important. All right, we're going to look at selfishness. Basically, there are some people who have decided that they are God and that you exist for their glory and pleasure. Your function in life is to make them happy. That's why you exist. That's why every other person in the world exists. They basically, now by the way, any of us can go into a selfish mode, so there are days we are all in this selfish mind frame. There are some people, however, that use this as their main strategy of life. But we are all here sometimes. And when we are in that selfishness, what it is that we will not respect anyone else's boundary. Because that boundary means I will not have as much pleasure or power or prosperity or happiness as I would have if simply you will do what I want you to do. And this is where abuse comes in. The way that I normally motivate people is through I abuse them. I hurt them until they say yes. I place them in a emotional half Nelson. And so there's a wide range of things I can do. Now, some of the worst cases, I can physically attack them, and they can become, afraid of me at a physical level. I say, I push them, and I say, if you're either going to do what I say or you're going to be sorry. And I throw in a threat there as well. I can verbally attack them. I can say, I can't believe, you've always said you were my friend, but you are such a hypocrite. There isn't 1 ounce of friendship in you. If you cared for me at all, if you cared for our relationship, you would do this. Wow, little guilt, see. And there is this whole book, there's business books written on winning through intimidation. They train. Well, by the way, I'll throw this in free. Have you ever had a salesperson where you have had a hard time saying no to the salesperson? You ever been there? They just have a way of always coming back, always putting pressure on you. And, pretty soon you're sitting there with a rainbow vacuum cleaner and you already have 3 vacuum cleaners and you now have a 4th. And, but he was such a kind young man, you didn't really want to hurt him. And, his mother needed the money to get cured from cancer and yada, 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 whatever. And his manager was only going to give you such a special deal if you decided today. He had the manager on the phone and he was saying, listen, the manager said, just for you, we'll make this special deal, but it's got to be done now. Yeah. See, I know that. I used to train salesmen, see. So, I understand all the stuff they're doing. In fact, my first job I was a rainbow vacuum cleaner salesman. So that was my first job out of high school, see? So I had an early exposure to that. So here's the key. And by the way, it can work in other kinds when someone's trying to just push you for selfish motivation. And it is, in fact, true. We just don't usually verbalize it. It's not a lie. It's true. We just don't normally verbalize it. You just say to that salesman, say, listen, I have a horrible gut feeling about this. And I just can't say yes to this because my gut is just telling me no. Now, what they will try to get you to do is expand and give a reason for your gut. Because they've been trained, and by the way, selfish people are very good at this, they've been trained to overcome anything you say logically. Whatever reason you give, they'll outtalk you. They can come up with it. But you see, it's impossible to argue with a gut feeling. They don't have the power to suddenly say, I'm going to lay my hands on you and your gut feeling is going to go away. The salesman would kind of be crossing a few boundaries at that point, okay? Major ones, and you could say, well, go ahead, try. Nope, still there, sorry. Now, the fact of the matter is you really do have a bad gut feeling. Now, the fact you have reasons is not relevant because your reasons won't hold up in that relationship. So you just get to the bottom line and say, and guess what? You're allowed to have a gut feeling. And you're allowed to say no because your gut doesn't feel good about it. Adults have the right to disagree. So let's try that together. Say that out loud. That's very important. Adults have the right to disagree. Woo! There's no rule that says you have to agree with this selfish person. You're not failing some moral test by not agreeing with the moral person. So you have to understand, this will be one of the most difficult relationships to set boundaries in because they're going to hurt you and you're going to have to know how to distance yourself from the person causing hurt. You're also going to have to say no firmly, but don't get elevated because they can get meaner than you. And not only that, it just, even if you win, you don't win because now you become mean and you don't like feeling mean and so you feel guilty and then you call them up and say, listen, I'm really sorry. I didn't handle that right, and then they get their way. So the thing is, you don't want to go there. You don't want to return evil for evil, because that just means evil wins. You want to be able to say no and give them dignity and respect, even when they're not providing you dignity and respect. And you also have to, if someone begins to abuse you verbally, emotionally, physically call the cops, 911, that's why it was created. They'll learn. You want somebody to not hurt you physically anymore, call 911. They'll learn. Had somebody that they, were having a problem in a marriage, and husband got violent, they called 911. The husband has not gotten violent again for 7 years. And the reason he found out was a boundary had been set. You will not do that, or I'm going to simply take what a sane, stable, spiritual person does when they're being threatened with physical harm. They call the cops. And they say, protect me. And you set a boundary, okay? Now, it's always hard and complicated, but that's what you have to do. And what you do is you simply take a time out and you say, listen, right now, you're hurting me with your words, you're hurting me with your actions, I'm feeling threatened. I can't possibly think through this decision in this emotional situation. And therefore, I want 24 hours to think about it and pray about it. Now, what are they going to say? No, I don't want you to think about it and pray about it. Well, they could, but that kind of definitely demonstrates they're selfish. And very few decisions, by the way, have to be made now. And there's not a whole lot of decisions you're either going to have to make it this second or, it won't work. The fact of the matter is you can just say, wait. And in that time, you process. And then you choose a space that's a safe space, and you communicate your feelings. And if your feeling is no, you simply say, I have thought about it. I have never been sorry any time I have said to someone, I want 24 hours to think about it. That's a boundary. You're not being mean. How could you interpret that as mean? You're asking me to make a decision. The decision is a difficult decision for me. I need 24 hours to think about it. How can they argue with that? Now you have to, by the way, you want to communicate your boundaries ahead of time. That something's going to be standard operating procedure. But basically in a relationship, yes, it's perfectly okay for, a parent to say to a child, this is the rule. If you want to go over and visit someone's house, you have to give me at least, and you want to make it 24 hours, 24-hour notice. If you come up and say, can I go over to Fred's house tonight? The answer is always going to be no, because I don't want to be put in a situation where I haven't had time to think about whether this is a good choice for you. So, if you ask me 24 hours ahead of time, then I will give you my answer. You may not like my answer, but I'll give you my answer, but I've had enough time to process it. That's a boundary. See, a boundary is you deciding what are the rules that you believe are wise and good for Christians, biblical rules. In other words, you get to figure out your rules. If you don't have any rules, people are going to walk all over you, because they'll dictate to you their rules. My rule is you do what I want you to do when I want you to do it, and if you don't, I will send cold pricklies down your way. And we hate cold pricklies. Because you see, the worst type of pain we suffer is the fear of abandonment and rejection. People can hurt us with their words, and they hurt us emotionally, they can even hurt us sexually and be aggressive sexually, they can hurt us physically. But the very worst pain that people can cause is the threatened abandonment and rejection. And many times the reason we won't set a boundary is we're afraid that the person will abandon us and reject us, and we don't want to deal with that pain. But the problem is, it's blackmail. Now, it is hard, because when someone goes to prison, they're not going to execute them. What is the worst type of punishment that our prisons have?
Solitary confinement.
Yeah, it's solitary confinement. Yeah. Being tied away. And you would think, for the most part, you wouldn't want to be with those people. So the thing is that that's the toughest thing. However, you have to understand, if you're going to have a real relationship with somebody, they can't threaten to blow it up every time that you say no. Because if so, you don't have the right to say no. And if they know that, they're going to pull that trigger every single time. So you have to learn to communicate to them, listen, I care about you, I care about our relationship. I don't want it to end, and I would like us to continue on, but if you really feel that you would have to leave me over this issue, I'm sad about that. I'm incredibly sad about that. That really troubles me. But in my gut, I just can't say yes to this decision. I just have this gut feeling that this tells me this would be a horrible mistake, and I'm sure that you wouldn't want me to go against my gut feeling, would you? Now, if they say, yes, I don't care about your gut, well, then you're most likely time to walk away from that relationship anyway, okay? So, selfish people are pushing, and they do not take no for an answer easily. They push. Codependents, they say yes to everything. Because their one great concern of life is that everyone likes them, that they only get warm fuzzies from those people in their life, that they never get a cold prickly sent their way, that they never upset a person, that they never offend anyone. And so, if only they can have it so that everyone is happy with them all the time, they have achieved the highest measure of their success. Now, selfish people like to be in relationship with codependent people. Anybody know why? Can you guess why? What was that? Yeah. Because they're getting exactly what they want. This guy only wants yes, and this person says yes all the time. It's a match made in Hades. Hey. It's really good. Now what happens is that the codependent starts, feeling usually a little abused and used and doesn't feel appreciated at some point. A lot of times there'll be a sense the codependent person will, be feeling that the other person will appreciate what they're doing, and because of that, let them have their way sometime. They'll be disappointed, and so it begins, this relationship begins to fray because the codependent person starts doubting whether codependency is really working. Okay, in other words, it doesn't really seem to be moving into a true, healthy relationship, which is what the codependent thought. Codependent thought they'd found the answer to healthy relationships, and that is always say yes regardless of what people ask. The other problem the codependent has is the codependent feels overwhelmed. Why is the codependent overwhelmed? Because
they overburden themselves with too much.
you have to say yes to everybody. And the trouble is, they're going to ask you for more than the 100 hours you have. And nobody really wants to spend all 100 hours only doing what other people want. There's going to be, normally some desire anyway to have some space. And so they start feeling overwhelmed. They're not feeling nurtured. They're not feeling reinforced. They're getting very tired. They're getting very depressed. They're not liking life. And so, they do get the warm fuzzy, but it's not as warm fuzzy anymore because they don't really feel appreciated. So the codependency, is there. And understand that's the answer for some people. These people have no boundaries. These people, codependents, when they're acting codependently, have no boundaries. In other words, they won't say no because it might upset the people in their lives. Now, selfish people have extremely strong boundaries, but you don't know that because nobody dares ask them for anything because they're scary. I mean, they're coming on with such a strong, intimidating, you don't even think about it. I'll talk to some codependents sometimes, I'll say to them, well, why don't you ask them to do X, Y, Z? They look at me like, are you crazy? Are you insane? Because they know that there's nothing but no. Anything you would ask of a selfish person when they're operating out of selfishness is always going to be no. They have overly strong boundaries because they don't in any way, shape, or form ever give anything to anybody. And so that's why it's abusive. By the way, see, boundaries are really defensive. When they're not defensive, when they're aggressive, that's when they become harmful. That's not a boundary, that's domination. And so that's one of those things. We have to make sure we set up a defensive boundary, but not an offensive campaign. We have to be careful. You understand, we can all desire to be selfish sometime. Then there's the martyr. The martyr is a special type of a codependent. The martyr, though, see, this person would have a tendency to idolize the selfish person. They really would look at that selfish person as stronger, brighter, better, one of the best and the brightest in the world. They would have a hero complex about that person. They really would, believe in that person. Okay, so the codependent person, sees that selfish person, and not only does the selfish person see themselves as the center of the universe, the codependent person sees that person as the center of the universe. But the martyr is different. The martyr sees the other person as weak and wounded and wicked. They're in full comprehension of the selfishness and the wrongness. Yeah, they're very much aware, but they have decided to save the other person. In other words, the other person needs saved. The other person must be saved. And how do you save them? You die to self, and you continue totally, absolutely, to suffer so that they will appreciate the suffering. And eventually, after appreciating your suffering and after seeing how much you love them and after how much you're willing to do for them, they'll be so overwhelmed with gratitude, they will go through a moral reformation, and you will have saved this person out of the depths. Now, many people who are in relationships with addicts play this role. It's not that they think the addict is a great person or, anything. They believe that the addict has major significant problems, but they want to save them. And so how they save them is by giving the addict anything they need, hoping that that person will become so overwhelmed with gratitude that then they'll change. Surely at some point, all of my sacrifices, now this, by the way, was my formula. Okay, this was the one I was in when I first went into ministry. And most of my life I was in that model. And the idea was, I thought there was a formula, which was, if I sacrificed enough, A plus B plus C plus D plus E, then the other person would have to get their life together. Now, by the way, the difference here is the martyr wants to have power and control. The martyr wants to control the other person. They're actually not willing to respect the other person's boundaries because they really want the other person to be dominated by what they see as the better picture for them. But they're trying to manipulate the other person through their sacrifice, through saying yes. It's reverse psychology. Yeah, a mother who has a child on addiction, they'll, make their best food for them and everything. I had one, father who, just was in denial. It's really not all that serious. It's not a whole lot different than when I drink after work. And, in other words, they're telling the teenager what they want to hear, and they're hoping that when the teenager sees them as kind, compassionate, long-suffering and all that other stuff, eventually the teenager will go, I guess this is really a bad idea. That doesn't happen. What happens is that person, especially if that person is in a selfish motif, the selfish person can use a martyr just as much as they can use a codependent. People can change, but it's not you can't change other people. The other key, you have no power or control over anyone but you. 100% rule. You are 100% responsible for what you say. You are 100% responsible for what you do. You are 100% responsible for your attitude, because attitudes are actually something you develop. But you are not able to control what another person does. You are not able to control what another person says. And you cannot control another person's attitude, even if you die for them. By the way, we can be all of these things in different times. There's usually one dominant thing we might be. But yes, definitely you can bounce back and forth between different things. And there also are shades of gray. So in other words, there's some people that would be, at 0 martyr, and other people at 100% martyr, and of course then all the shades of gray. So we're using these as a simplification of a complex world. But the reality is that, yeah, we can find ourselves in different spaces. And in different relationships, we can act differently. Well, the martyr is doing it because they feel that this is an expression of love. They think that this is the only way the other person will be saved. They have chosen this as the pathway to help the other person, begin to do right. Codependent is simply getting the reward. This person is sending warm fuzzies over. And this codependent person simply lives. They're a people pleaser. Every single time that person says, great, I can count on you. You're fantastic. Every compliment. Every praise. Ego boosting. Oh, that was great. Emotional candy. Gobble, 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 gobble. But they're not thinking, by the way, this person does not have a critical interpretation of that person either, because part of that is they also decide to look at that person in a very rose-colored glass type of way. Now, if a martyr and these two people, by the way, will normally not be in relationship with each other too much. In other words, the reason for that is, it's like 2 ticks, no dog. It's not a real satisfying relationship. 2 selfish people don't really like, to be in relationship with each other. Why? You're going to have conflict. We can't both be God. Okay? My will be done. No, my will be done. Okay? It's like, you have a sudden, you have a real conflict in the universe. That's, and by the way, if you do have that, then yeah, you get into some usually physically violent relationships. I mean, if you do get 2 selfish people in a, romantic relationship, look out for the fireworks. Because the thing is, somebody's going to break here, and it's not going to be me. And so you're going to get, usually that can be one of the dynamics in domestic violence, because it has to elevate, and both people have to be, after getting their way in some way. So the codependent person can't live without the approval, actually would be the way. They can't live without the approval of the other person. What they want is approval. And they get approval by saying yes. Have you ever noticed people like you to say yes? Has that been your experience? In other words, anytime ever anybody asks you anything, the only real answer that they want is yes. And that's all anybody wants. Doesn't matter who it is. If they come and ask you a question and say, will you do this? Can you help me? They don't want no. They want yes, right? So you don't get people pleasing. You don't please people by saying no most of the time. Unless people are very kind of mature and on a healthy page. But again, we're weak and wounded and wicked. So it's hard for us to stay on a healthy page. So yeah, now the martyr, you see, is in fact thinking the methodology for me to help this other person that they see has significant personality defaults is for me to be, and they confuse love with always saying yes. Now that can also be true of the codependent, but the purpose of the martyr, you have to understand, they want to save the other person.
And to get the glory.
Yeah, they could want to get the glory for it, but they, quite honestly, the whole problem is they think they can save the other person. I have bad news for you. You can't save anybody. You're going to have a hard enough time, meaning saved, meaning living your life in a sane, stable, safe, and spiritual manner. You're the only person that can decide you're going to live a sane, stable, spiritual, safe life. And that's going to should take all. You need to focus on that. It's not easy to live well. It's not easy to live sanely. It's not easy to live stably. It's not easy to live safely. It's not easy to live spiritually. It's simply not easy. But you can try to influence people that way, but influence understands boundaries. And part of that, we'll talk about, it understands when to say no. Now, there's another person. This person is the parent. This person has humbly come to a conclusion. They are better, and they are brighter. Therefore, you should do what they say, because it is for your good. The parent isn't trying to control the other person for their personal peace, for their prosperity. It's for you. And so I hate to hurt you this way. I hate to try to, but this is for your good. You're going to thank me in the end. So you see, this is the opposite side of this person, except for, martyrs and parents. This martyr thinks, I will save you by me sacrificing. The parent says, I will save you by you sacrificing. It's going to be tough, but the pain will be worth it. Okay? And so we don't see the other person as a peer. We don't give them an adult relationship. We don't say to them they have a responsibility to live their own life and to make their own decisions. We don't do that. We exalt ourselves. We put them down into a child category. We put ourselves up in the parent category. And then we're responsible to make sure they do right. What's the problem? They're not a child. They're another adult. They're going to resist you. Any healthy person is going to resist you. Except possibly this codependent person over here. Which means, again, the parents love to find codependents.
I'm not understanding the parent.
The parent is a person, for instance, that says, listen, I'm not, you can't go to school. And they'll just tell the person that, you can't go to school. If you go to school, you're going to fail. What you need to do is get into a trade school. And here, I've looked up 45 brochures for you. And we're going to look at these together. And we're going to decide what is the best course of action. Because you know you've never been successful financially. And I'm going to help you get it together. And you just give up all that idea of college. I don't care what you want to learn. I don't care. Trust me. I know better than you. You see, the problem is they're not talking to a 12-year-old, which, by the way, I don't even think that would be healthy to talk to a 12-year-old that way. They're talking to another adult. I had a mother one time, and her son turned 18, and she was trying to treat him like 12 years old. And so she was trying to tell him what he needed to do with his life in great detail. Parents will micromanage. And so she was explaining what he needed to do. He came home one day after about 6 months of this, which wasn't a whole lot different than the 18 years before. But you see, an important thing happened on his 18th birthday. He became an adult, legally in the state of Florida. So he came in and said, Mom, I need to tell you this. I don't really need to, but I'm going to tell you. I joined the Marines. She, of course, said, how can you do that? They didn't call me. I didn't give my permission. And he said, Mom, I don't need your permission. Okay? And now, yeah, he had to work through that. But he had come to a point where setting a boundary, joining the Marine Corps was one way of setting a boundary. And saying, no, you're not going to treat me as 12 years old. And I'm going to choose what I want to do in life. And since you're not, if I came to you and said, Mom, I want to join the Marine Corps, you wouldn't say, oh, okay, tell me the reasons why, and we wouldn't have an adult conversation about it. You would just tell me, no, you're not. That's what a parent would say to another adult. You're not doing that. I won't allow it. Use all kinds. And, yeah, if someone is heavily dependent, and there are children that are heavily codependent, yeah, they're dominated sometimes for decades by their parents because they don't want to fear the abandonment and rejection of their parents should they actually do what they want to do. I had one young man, and his dad decided he was going to be a dentist. And so he wanted to be either a musician or a philosopher, neither of which makes as much as most dentists. And so the thing is Dad didn't see that as a very good thing, so Dad wouldn't have any of it. He said he's not going to do that. And so he sent him off to a school to learn to become a dentist. And then he failed, even though he's a genius IQ. See, that's passive aggressive. Passive aggressive is I say yes, but I mean no. So I will say yes just because I don't want the cold prickly. But in reality, I'm not going to do it. And so then that leads to other conflicts. Now eventually the young man he's moving in the direction of just becoming a philosopher. I think he gave up on being a musician. Every time you set a boundary, if we define hurt as someone's not happy, then it's impossible. Boundaries are going to cause people to not be happy, at least temporarily. What we have to do, we can set boundaries up in loving ways. We can communicate a boundary. You use the sandwich technique.
This concludes CD1. Please change to CD2.